Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This column deals with the privatization of India's space sector. The writers of the column argue that India has a great opportunity to emerge as a global hub for space based startups. See, the space domain has always been a new frontier that countries have always tried to conquer as a part of their geopolitical rivalry. It all began in the 1950s during the Cold War, when the then Soviet Union launched the world's first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. This landmark event triggered an immediate space race between the two superpowers, that is, the Soviet Union and the United States. While this space race had geopolitical and strategic ramifications, it did contribute immensely to the advancement of space technology. The ideological rivalry between the two superpowers became a strong motivation for the space sector to push towards rapid advances in space technology. Today, the writers argue that a similar space race has begun, but this time the competition is amongst the private space industries, which are trying to dominate the space market. According to several estimates, today's space economy is valued at around $440 billion, but India currently occupies just around 2% of this market. Even though India is a leading spacefaring nation, its share in the global commercial space market is very low, and as a result, it attracts very low investments in the private space sector. In this financial year alone, around $68 billion have been invested around the world in the space market, but India, with around 110 private space companies, stood at the fourth place with regard to attracting global investments and received not more than $2 billion. So, in this context, the writers argue that India has a tremendous opportunity to capitalize the space market, and with the right regulatory policies, it can quickly emerge as a global hub for space based startups. Because, see, private space players can bring in tremendous advantages to the space industry. They can not only help democratize space usage, which is largely monopolized by the public sector and state entities, but they can also help in building commercial value by advancing new innovations and new technologies. See, in the case of India, the space sector is largely dominated by the public entity, which is ISRO. ISRO has led India's efforts as a spacefaring nation and today has developed end to end capabilities, including the ability to indigenously develop and manufacture satellites, launch vehicles, and even carry out interplanetary missions. For strategic and security reasons, India had kept the space sector limited to government owned entities such as ISRO. But after ISRO established and proved its end to end capabilities to carry out various complex missions, India has slowly started opening up the space sector to private players. But as of now, this private involvement is very limited. In the current setup, ISRO is still the lead space agency that is responsible for undertaking all the missions, whereas the private industry is roped in by ISRO only for manufacturing certain equipment and components for these missions. So currently, the private players in India are not really involved in research and development and in generation of intellectual property, but instead, the ISRO is outsourcing its existing intellectual property to the private sector in a limited manner so that they could help speed up ISRO's missions by taking away routine responsibilities such as the manufacturing of critical equipment and components. These essential technologies have already been developed, tested, and proven by ISRO, and it is merely outsourcing some of these contracts to the private sector, which in turn take over the manufacturing of these components on behalf of ISRO. So, this limited participation of private players is not conducive to attract global investments because for the private space sector to flourish, they should be allowed to get involved in research and development and to create their own intellectual property. So, if you compare the privatization policies of India and ISRO with other mature space agencies such as NASA of the United States, CNSA of China, European Space Agency, Roscosmos of Russia, you will find that these mature space agencies are not only outsourcing some of their contracts to the private sector, but they are also actively collaborating with them and enabling the development of critical technologies by their respective private space sector. Take, for example, how NASA has collaborated with SpaceX and Blue Origin. These private space companies of the US, including Boeing, they have simply revolutionized the space sector because through their own investments in R&D, they have developed their own capabilities to launch missions, such as sending crew and supplies to the International Space Station. Driven by the efficiencies of the private sector, these companies have successfully managed to cut costs and have managed to bring down the turnaround time involved in space missions. For example, SpaceX has pioneered reusable launch vehicles, which has helped in cutting the cost and time involved in sending crew and supplies to the International Space Station. Public space agencies like NASA have enabled the private sector by not just supporting the creation of a space ecosystem, but they also award a part of their budget to give out guaranteed contracts to these private companies. So in countries like US, China, and as well as in Russia, such extensive collaboration between the public and private sector has been possible because of their clear-cut regulatory policies. So India as well has been trying to draw these lessons, and recently it has taken two major initiatives towards privatization of India's space sector. Under ISRO, two new institutions have been set up, known as IN-SPACE and NSIL. IN-SPACE stands for Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. This institution will function as a single window nodal agency to boost the commercialization of Indian space activities. It will function as a supplement to ISRO and will proactively work with ISRO to promote the entry of non-government private entities into the space sector. IN-SPACE will also facilitate a swift onboarding of private players by coming out with encouraging policies in a friendly regulatory environment. Whereas New Space India Limited, which was incorporated in 2019, will function as a wholly owned government company under ISRO and falls under the administrative control of the Department of Space. It will function as the commercial arm of ISRO, similar to Antrix Corporation, which is responsible for facilitating the launch of foreign satellites. So, as a similar commercial arm, the NSIL will be primarily responsible for enabling Indian industries to take up high technology space related activities and will also be responsible for the promotion and commercial exploitation of the products and services that will emanate from the Indian space program. So while these initiatives of India are noteworthy, there are still many hurdles for India to cross before it can emerge as a global hub for space-based startups. In order to realize this ambition, what India needs is a clear-cut regulatory framework which will help in putting in place transparent laws and policies with complete legal clarity for the investors. Because in a regulatory vacuum, it will become nearly impossible to attract investments. And hence, India will have to work towards introducing a transparent and clear-cut regulatory framework. This framework should be designed to address the specific parts in space technology that should cover the entire spectrum of the space value chain. Because in the space domain, there are different sections, including design, development, manufacturing and construction, launch, operation, etc. And all these aspects of the value chain have to be covered specifically by a regulatory framework. Instead of having a generic policy in place, there has to be a specific framework that deals with the different segments of space technology so that the investors and the developers have complete legal clarity with regard to the regulatory guidelines and policies. India will also have to ensure that this regulatory framework is in line with its international treaty obligations under the Outer Space Treaty or the United Nations resolution and the Treaty on Principles governing the activities of states in the exploration of use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. Adhering to these international treaty standards will enable the global investors to place more confidence in India's regulatory framework. This framework will also have to deal with all the aspects of licensing, authorization, and supervision, which are essential components in the development of space technology and as well as in carrying out space missions. For example, in countries like France, there is a clear cut policy in place that provides for four different licenses, along with case by case authorization that has to be procured by the private space players. So, India as well has to put in place a clear cut licensing, authorizing, and supervision mechanism to cover all the aspects of space technology. Then, another crucial aspect of space law is related to insurance and liability. It basically provides for financial cover to deal with space related accidents and helps in identifying as to which institution is liable to pay compensation and to cover for the losses in case of mishaps and accidents. In this regard, if you look at Western countries which have an evolved private space industry, there is a cap, that is a maximum cap on liability and the financial damages that the private industry has to pay for. This not only helps in holding the private sector accountable in case of any disasters, but it will also not discourage the private industry because the extent of their liability is subjected to a maximum cap. Then in countries like Australia, private space operators and companies, they are mandatorily required to hold insurance of up to 100 million Australian dollars. So India also will have to come out with such clear-cut guidelines with regard to insurance and liability so that the private industry can not only understand the risks involved to their investments, but they can also be held accountable in case of accidents and disasters. Then finally, the biggest hurdle for India to emerge as a space hub is the shortage of talent and manpower, as India has suffered from excessive brain drain in this sector. Since India's space sector was entirely dominated by the public entity ISRO, there were very limited opportunities for space professionals, and as a result, thousands of space scientists have left the country, and today they are working for Western space agencies like NASA, SpaceX, European Space Agency, and the others. A recent study has shown that this brain drain from India in the space sector has increased by 85% since 2005. So, this significant loss of talent is a direct result of the inadequate policies that we had in the space sector. The lack of a regulatory framework had created bottlenecks for the private space industry to hire this talent. So, if India has to retain its talent, it will have to come out with a clear cut framework which will help the private investors and the private industry to hire and recruit the right kind of talent so that they can contribute to India's advancement in the space sector. So the writers conclude by saying that India's private space sector is still in an embryonic stage, but there is tremendous scope to build a viable business model. And for that to happen, India will have to make use of the window of opportunity that is available currently by coming out with a clear cut regulatory framework so that Indian startups can be nurtured in the space sector, which will not only help in attracting more investments into the space industry, but will also help India emerge as a global hub for space based technology. Now let's look at a column from page number 9, in which the writer explores the potential of hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, as a clean fuel, and how India is in a unique position to exploit green hydrogen to decarbonize its economy and to achieve its climate action targets. See, hydrogen is considered to be the most promising solution to decarbonize our economy because hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and it is not only lighter, which makes it easier for storage and transportation, but it is also energy dense. It is nearly 2 to 3 times more efficient than burning petrol. So if hydrogen is used as a clean alternative fuel, it can be used for a wide variety of applications across different sectors. It could be used to power hybrid electric vehicles and as a fuel source across several polluting industries such as cement, steel, oil refineries, etc. So it is this potential of hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, which makes it the most promising solution to decarbonize our economies and to achieve our climate action targets. This hydrogen fuel is produced through the process of electrolysis, under which a water molecule is split into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen thus produced becomes a source of clean fuel, and this hydrogen is also color coded into different categories depending on the method of its production. That is, depending on the source of energy which is used to power electrolysis, the final output hydrogen is given a color code. For example, we have different types of hydrogen, such as gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, etc. This color coding is done depending on the method of production used in electrolysis and the energy used to power electrolysis. So first we have brown hydrogen produced through gasification of fossil fuels. Then we have white hydrogen, which is a byproduct of industrial processes. Then we have black or gray hydrogen produced through steam methane reforming process by using natural gas. And we also have pink or purple or red hydrogen, where the electrolysis is carried out by using nuclear power. And blue hydrogen is produced through carbon sequestration of hydrogen that is derived from fossil fuel sources. Then yellow hydrogen is produced through electrolysis by using grid electricity that is usually produced through non-renewable sources. Then we also have turquoise hydrogen produced through thermal splitting of methane, which at the end produces carbon. But all these forms of hydrogen are not entirely clean because they are either produced using fossil fuels and dirty sources of energy, or some of them end up releasing carbon into the atmosphere. Then producing hydrogen through nuclear power is also not feasible, even though nuclear energy is clean, because the nuclear sector carries a lot of risks and the investments are also very high. So the most suitable form of hydrogen to decarbonize our economy has to be green hydrogen, which is produced by using renewable sources of energy. For producing green hydrogen, electrolysis is carried out by using renewable sources of energy coming from solar or wind. And the hydrogen thus produced is known as green hydrogen as it doesn't contribute to global warming. Hence, green hydrogen is considered to be the best candidate to decarbonize our economy. And the hydrogen thus produced can be used not only to power hybrid and electric vehicles, but it could also be used as a source of clean power and fuel across various industries. Especially high polluting industries such as refineries, fertilizers, steel, cement, etc. They could all adopt green hydrogen in the place of dirty fossil fuels, thereby helping in the decarbonization of our economy. The hydrogen thus produced has numerous advantages because of the near zero carbon footprint of green hydrogen and how it could be used to not just power vehicles, but it could also be used across industries because it can be easily stored and transported. Since it's also very light as compared to heavy lithium ion batteries, it could also be used to power heavier vehicles like trucks and commercial vehicles. Also, compared to regular hybrid and electric vehicles, the refueling of green hydrogen can be done in a matter of few minutes, thereby making it very efficient for transportation. Though hydrogen as a fuel has a few disadvantages, these can be overcome with the scaling up of its adoption and through better advances in technology. See, currently it's very difficult to scale up hydrogen as a fuel because there are very limited investments around the world and there are very few private players involved in this sector. But with the right kind of government support, these companies can scale up hydrogen production and as well as hydrogen adoption as a fuel, thereby helping in overcoming this hurdle. Currently, the low adoption of hydrogen as a fuel has led to inadequate infrastructure in the domain, such as the lack of hydrogen stations for refueling. But as the adoption goes up and as the sector is scaled up, the infrastructure will also be created through active collaboration between governments and private institutions. Then, though hydrogen as a fuel raises questions of safety because of its explosive, highly combustible nature, this can be easily tackled through technological advancements. So, in short, when it comes to using hydrogen as a clean fuel, the hurdles and the challenges can be easily overcome, and its large scale adoption can bring tremendous benefits to the environment and as well as to the economy. Because, see, currently India is heavily dependent on coal and oil. Nearly 75% of India's energy sources are based on coal and oil sources. Since India is deficient in these fossil fuels, we end up importing these critical sources of energy, thereby significantly increasing India's import bill. This has also become a geopolitical constraint for India because India is dependent on other countries for its energy security. So these challenges could also be addressed if India becomes self-reliant in green hydrogen as an alternative fuel. And it will not only reduce India's import dependency on other countries, but it will also help in bringing down our import bills. And more importantly, it will help in decarbonizing our economy and to achieve the ambitious goal of stepping up our renewable energy investments as per our climate action targets under the Paris Agreement. It will help India reach its commitment of 175 gigawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy by 2022 and to further take this up to 500 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030. It will also help India in achieving its net zero emissions target before the 2070 deadline that the Prime Minister has recently announced at the Glasgow summit. Experts have argued that hydrogen as a clean fuel has tremendous potential to decarbonize the economy, especially in highly polluting sectors such as cement, steel, refineries, fertilizers, etc. According to estimates of the Hydrogen Council, if green hydrogen adoption is scaled up around the world, then by the middle of this century, we can achieve a reduction of 80 gigatons of CO2, thereby helping the world meet its climate action targets. See, Hydrogen Council is a private global CEO-led initiative of around 92 major energy and transportation companies comprising of industries and private institutions from around the world. This council is involved in promoting hydrogen economy, which is being proactively pursued by governments around the world. So today, several governments have already come out with national laws and policies to put in place a hydrogen-based economy to cut down their emissions and to achieve their climate action targets. India is also on the same path, and in fact, amongst the major emitters, India is the only country which has come out with the right policies and actions, which has kept the country on track to achieving the Paris targets by making considerable investments in the renewable energy sector. So, as a continuation of this approach, India has recently launched the National Hydrogen Mission, which was announced by the Prime Minister during the Independence Day celebrations of this year. And under this hydrogen mission, India is planning to scale up the production of green hydrogen and its adoption as a clean fuel across the economy. Here, the writer argues that India is in a unique position compared to other countries because it already has a head start in the renewable energy sector. Over the last 10 to 15 years, India has made massive investments in the solar sector and as well as in other sources of clean renewable energy. And this has significantly brought down the cost of solar power and the cost of renewable energy. Plus, India being a tropical country, it is blessed with abundant solar resource. So this ongoing transformation in the solar sector can easily help India to use the solar power to massively scale up the production of green hydrogen through green electrolysis. So now what India needs is a clear-cut policy and framework for promoting the long-term adoption of green hydrogen in line with the vision and objectives of the National Hydrogen Mission. The government will have to come out with a policy and a framework to ensure that green hydrogen is adopted across sectors, ranging from oil refineries, cement, steel, fertilizers, and as well as across the transportation industry. For encouraging this adoption, the government will have to come out with adequate funding and incentives. and put India on the path of emerging as a leader in the field of green hydrogen. Companies like the Indian Oil Corporation have already taken few steps in this regard, and it has already floated a global tender to set up two massive green hydrogen generation units at its oil refineries. So such initiatives will have to be further scaled up with government support, and the government should also enable the private industry to create the other necessary infrastructure needed for storage, for production, transportation, and distribution. Now let's look at an important article from page number 10 that is based on the data brought out by the National Family Health Survey 5. This article focuses on contraception methods that are prevalent in India, and it shows how the onus of contraception and family planning still lies on women because of the social stigma and patriarchy associated with male contraception. See, when it comes to preventing unplanned pregnancies and when it comes to family planning, male sterilization and male contraception, such as usage of condoms, is considered to be the most simplest, most effective, and as well as the cheapest option. But despite this, data from the National Family Health Survey clearly shows that male contraception and male sterilization is very low in the country. According to the survey, male sterilization is around zero point 0.2 and zero point 0.3 in urban and rural areas, respectively. There is hardly any improvement as compared to the previous survey, and even condom usage is extremely low amongst Indian men. The survey shows that less than 1 in 10 men use condoms, whereas nearly 4 in 10 women are made to undergo female sterilization. As you can see from the data, female sterilization is very high as compared to male sterilization, and this clearly shows that the onus of family planning and contraception still lies on women, and it's a direct result of the hesitancy of Indian men to undergo male sterilization or to use male contraception. Experts have pointed out that condom usage is very low in India because family planning and contraception is primarily considered to be the responsibility of women in a male dominated Indian society. Experts have noted that for most Indian men, sex stands purely for pleasure, whereas for women, it's just about procreation or it involves the fear of getting pregnant. According to these studies, Indian men generally believe that usage of condoms reduces pleasure, and thus they shift the burden of contraception and family planning to women. So this forces women to rely upon female sterilization or to use contraception methods such as emergency pills or even intrauterine devices. The only silver lining in this data is that condom usage in the country has gone up from 5.6 as noted in the previous National Family Health Survey to 9.5%. Condom usage has increased relatively in the urban areas, whereas it still continues to remain very low in the rural areas. So this crucial data not only reflects the social issues that are prevalent with regard to sex, pregnancy, and contraception, but it also highlights the lack of sexual freedom and reproductive rights faced by Indian women. Then coming to the last article on page number 12, India has offered to help African countries, especially in southern Africa, which are fighting the new COVID variant that has been named as Omicron by WHO. This new variant, which reportedly has around 50 mutations, especially on the spike protein structure, is being considered as one of the most dangerous variants of the SARS coronavirus 2, and it has led to the reimposition of travel restrictions around the world. As the outbreak of the new variant has been reported in several countries, the region where it reportedly originated, that is Southern Africa, is facing a complete boycott from the rest of the world as these countries struggle to contain the pandemic. As cases rise in these countries, they are struggling for help, and India, being a close partner of several African nations, has come to their immediate assistance. Even last year, when the pandemic broke out, India supplied essential medical items and medical supplies, including vaccines, to several countries. And now again, it has reiterated all possible medical support and assistance to the small and poor African countries which are struggling with the challenges posed by the new variant. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: India currently stands on the cusp of building a space ecosystem, and with ISRO being the guiding body, India can now evolve as a space startup hub for the world. Evaluate. The second question: hydrogen is the most promising solution to decarbonize sectors like cement, steel, and refineries. The National Hydrogen Mission and the green hydrogen sector will give India a quantum jump in meeting our climate targets. Examine. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. So, this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.